Hi, everyone. We're going to do some more readings from classical rhetoric. Today is Gorgias's Encomium of Helen. A little bit of an introduction. Gorgias was a sophist, a kind of rhetorical teacher for hire, and among the sophists was something of a rock star. He commanded large audiences and high fees for his services and traveled all around the ancient world providing his teachings and giving speeches. And the Encomium of Helen would have been one of his kind of demonstration speeches. He would show up in town and find a busy street corner or what have you and dig into his kind of demonstration speech where he shows his talents and using that as a way to attract potential students and call attention to himself and also to just demonstrate his prowess as a speaker and his abilities. So this is a really interesting piece. It's very nice that we have it surviving. Some think of it as a kind of proto-feministic piece because it reverses the cultural expectation of the myth of Helen. And you can find all about the myth of Helen in other places. I'm not going to go into that too much here, but this would have been a surprising speech to hear as an ancient Athenian, where Helen is usually given the blame for the Trojan War, the mythological war nonetheless, but would have been seen as kind of a villain, as kind of an evil figure who seduced Paris and led to this, military conflict. But Gorgias is doing something really interesting here, where he's saying, hold on a minute. Let us see if Helen is really to blame. And that's what makes it an epidictic speech, if we use the terminology from Aristotle. It's a speech in praise or in blame. In this case, it's in praise of Helen, or really in the reversal of blame, in trying to remove the blame from Helen. So let's read a little bit of Gorgias's Encomium of Helen. There's 4 possible causes that Gorgias gives for Helen's actions of why she, abandoned her husband and went with Paris. Well, the first is that Gorgias says it may have been the will of the gods, so it wasn't her fault. The next is that perhaps Paris forced her physically against her will. 3, it could have been the force of love, a powerful kind of force that overcame her. And 4th, interestingly, for those of us studying rhetoric, it was the power of speech that overcame her. So let's dig right in. Gorgias writes, "What is becoming to a city is manpower, to a body beauty, to a soul wisdom, to an action virtue, to a speech truth, and the opposites of these are unbecoming." A kind of nice parallel structure there. What is becoming to a city is manpower. What is becoming to a body is beauty. Man and woman and speech and deed and city and object should be honored with praise if praiseworthy, and incur blame if unworthy, for it is an equal error and mistake to blame the praisable and to praise the blamable. It is the duty of one and the same man both to speak the needful rightly and to refute the unrightfully spoken. Thus it is right to refute. Those who rebuke Helen, a woman about whom the testimony of inspired poets has become univocal and unanimous, as had the ill omen of her name, which has become a reminder of misfortunes. For my part, by introducing some reasoning into my speech, I wish to free the accused of blame, and, having reproved her detractors as prevaricators and proved the truth, to free her from their ignorance. So you see some nice exposition here. He's setting up. Gorgias is setting up what he's going to do, not unlike how we provide a thesis statement or a purpose statement in contemporary writing in this speech. Now it is not unclear, not even to a few, that in nature and in blood the woman who is the subject of the speech is preeminent among preeminent men and women. For it is clear that her mother was Leda, and her father was in fact a god, Zeus. But allegedly immortal, Tyndareus, of whom the former was shown to be her father, because he was, and the latter was disproved, because he was said to be, and the one was the most powerful of men, and the other the Lord of all. Born from such stock she had godlike beauty, which taking and not mistaking she kept. In many did she work much desire for her love, and her one body was the cause of bringing together many bodies of men, thinking great thoughts for great goals, of whom some had greatness of wealth, some the glory of ancient nobility, some the vigor of personal agility, some command of acquired knowledge. And all came because of a passion which loved to conquer, and a love of honor which was unconquered. Who it was, and why, and how he sailed away, taking Helen as his love, I shall not say. To tell the knowing what they know shows it is right, but brings no delight. Having now gone beyond the time once set for my speech, I shall go on to the beginning of my future speech, and I shall set forth the causes through which it was likely that Helen's voyage to Troy should take place. You see a little bit of an aside there, like a direct address to the audience, almost a little bit of a nod and a wink, like, okay, I know I'm going on, now I'm going to jump into the real content of the matter here. For either by will of fate and decision of the gods and vote of necessity did she do what she did, or by force reduced, or by words seduced, or by love possessed. So now Gorgias is laying out those four arguments for the potential removal of the blame from Helen here. This is at marking 6, section 6. Now, if through the first, by way of the gods, now if through the first it is right for the responsible one to be held responsible, for God's predetermination cannot be hindered by human premeditation, for it is the nature of things, not for the strong to be hindered by the weak, but for the weaker to be ruled and drawn by the stronger, and for the stronger to lead and the weaker to follow. God is a stronger force than man in might and in wit and in other ways. If then one must place blame on fate and on a god, one must free Helen from disgrace. So in terms of the Aristotelian artificial proofs, that's a kind of logos. He's saying, okay, if gods are stronger than men, if gods are stronger than humans, and it was through the will of the gods that Helen made these decisions, then, therefore, we must remove the blame from Helen. Okay, now the second removal of blame. Gorgias goes on, but if she was raped by violence and illegally assaulted and unjustly insulted, it is clear that the raper as the insulter did the wronging, and the raped as the insulted did the suffering. It is right then for the barbarian who undertook a barbaric undertaking in word and law and deed to meet with blame in word, exclusion in law, and punishment in deed. And surely it is proper for a woman raped and robbed of her country and deprived of her friends to be pitied rather than pilloried. He did the dread deeds, she suffered them. It is just therefore to pity her, but to hate him. So there's the second potential removal of blame, that perhaps she was forced, she was physically forced. And therefore, we don't place blame upon her. Then speech. But if it was speech which persuaded her and deceived her heart, not even to this is it difficult to make an answer and to banish blame as follows. Speech is a powerful lord, which by means of the finest and most invisible body effects the divinest works. It can stop fear and banish grief, and create joy and nurture pity. I shall show how this is the case, since it is necessary to offer proof to the opinion of my hearers. I both deem and define all poetry as speech with meter. Fearful shuddering and tearful pity and grievous longing come upon its hearers, and at the actions and physical sufferings of others in good fortunes and in evil fortunes, through the agency of words, the soul is wont to experience a suffering of its own. But come, I shall turn from one argument to another. Sacred incantations sung with words are bearers of pleasure and banishers of pain. For merging with opinion in the soul, the power of the incantation is wont to beguile it and persuade it and alter it by witchcraft. There have been discovered two arts of witchcraft and magic. One consists of errors of soul and the other of deceptions of opinions. All who have and do persuade people of things do so by molding a false argument. For if all men on all subjects had both memory of things past and awareness of things present, and foreknowledge of the future, speech would not be similarly similar, since as things are now, it is not easy for them to recall the past, nor to consider the present, nor to predict the future. So that on most subjects most men take opinion as counselor to their soul. But since opinion is slippery and insecure, it casts those employing it into slippery and insecure successes. It's very interesting there where you have Gorgias kind of directly talking about the power of rhetoric. And maybe at the end of the video we'll talk about this more, but it seems to me it's hard to take Plato's critique of the sophists as being altogether accurate when you have such rich, profound, philosophical, meta-rhetorical thinking as you see here in Gorgias. But more on that later. You see this kind of comparison of speech as a kind of witchcraft or an art of false persuasion, which sounds similar to Plato's reckoning of how speech is sometimes like a drug or like a pharmacon. The ancient Greeks really recognized the power of speech. We'll go on here. What cause then prevents the conclusion that Helen, similarly, against her will, might have come under the influence of speech, just as if ravished by the force of the mighty? For it was possible to see how the force of persuasion prevails. Persuasion has the form of necessity, but it does not have the same power. For speech constrained the soul, persuading it which it persuaded, both to believe the things said and to approve the things done. The persuader, like a constrainer, does the wrong, and the persuaded, like the constrained in speech, is wrongly charged. To understand that persuasion, when added to speech, is wont also to impress the soul as it wishes. One must study, first the words of astronomers, who, substituting opinion for opinion, taking away one but creating another, make what is incredible and unclear seem true to the eyes of opinion. Then, second, logically necessary debates in which a single speech, written with art but not spoken with truth, bends a great crowd and persuades. And third, the verbal disputes of philosophers, in which the swiftness of thought is also shown, making the belief in an opinion subject to easy change. The effect of speech upon the condition of the soul is comparable to the power of drugs over the nature of bodies. We see that very thing crop up later in Plato. It's a fascinating line. The effect of speech upon the condition of the soul is comparable to the power of drugs over the nature of bodies. For just as different drugs dispel different secretions from the body, and some bring an end to disease and others to life, so also in the case of speeches, some distress, others delight, some cause fear, others make the hearers bold, and some drug and bewitch the soul with a kind of evil persuasion. You really have a kind of ethical rhetoric coming out here from Gorgias, a kind of meta-rhetorical assessment of the power of speech. It's really cool. It has been explained that if she was persuaded by speech, she did not do wrong, but was unfortunate. I shall discuss now the fourth cause. So this is the fourth cause in a fourth passage. For if it was love which did all these things, there will be no difficulty in escaping the charge of the sin which is alleged to have taken place. For the things we see do not have the nature which we wish them to have, but the nature which belligerents in war buckle on their warlike accoutrements of bronze and steel, some designed for defense, others for offense. If the sight sees this, immediately it is alarmed, and it alarms the soul, so that often men flee, panic-stricken, from future danger, as though it were present. For strong as is the habit of obedience to the law, it is ejected by fear resulting from sight, which coming to a man causes him to be indifferent both to what is judged honorable because of the law, and to the advantage to be derived from victory. It has happened that people, after having seen frightening sights, have also lost presence of mind for the present moment. In this way, fear extinguishes and excludes thought, and many have fallen victim to useless labor and dread diseases and hardly curable madnesses. And we'll see Plato talk about madness in great detail in Phaedrus. I mean, what you see here is Gorgias saying in some way, it's almost like our contemporary understanding of like a plea of insanity or something like that. It's like if Helen was so overtaken by love that she was no longer in her right mind, then how can we blame her? In this way, the sight engraves upon the mind images of things which have been seen, and many frightening impressions linger, and what lingers is exactly analogous to what is spoken. Moreover, whenever pictures perfectly create a single figure, and form from many colors and figures, they delight the sight, while the creation of statues and the production of works of art furnish a pleasant sight to the eyes. Thus it is natural for the sight to grieve for some things and to long for others, and much love and desire for many objects and figures is engraved in many men. If, therefore, the eye of Helen, pleased by the figure of Alexander, presented to her soul eager desire and contest of love, what wonder? If, being a god, love has the divine power of the gods, how could a lesser being reject and refuse it? But if it is a disease of human origin and a fault of the soul, it should not be blamed as a sin, but regarded as an affliction. For she came as she did come, caught in the net of fate, capital F, fate, not by the plans of the mind and by the constraints of love, not by the devices of art. Here's the last two sections, then, last two paragraphs. How then can one regard blame of Helen as just, since she is utterly acquitted of all charge, whether she did what she did through falling in love, or persuaded by sweet speech, or ravished by force, or constrained by the divine constraint? Gorgias then interestingly repeats his primary points, those four acquittals, those four possible reasons to remove blame from Helen, but does them in reverse chronological order as he introduced them in the speech. Then a very interesting final segment here. I have by means of speech removed disgrace from a woman. I have observed the procedure which I set up at the beginning of the speech. I have tried to end the injustice of blame and the ignorance of opinion. I wish to write a speech which would be a praise of Helen and a diversion to myself. And scholars still kind of debate that last line. I wish to write a speech which was a diversion to myself. And we see there, that's where we see Plato's critique of the sophists having some merit, having some real substance. Plato critiques the sophists as being able to make any cause seem the greater, can make the weaker cause seem the greater, or the greater the weaker. Now, it's not clear, though, and I'm not particularly convinced that Gorgias was just some kind of trickster rhetorician who was making up arguments just for the sake of making arguments. I think we see a lot of really serious reflection on the power of speech itself in Gorgias's Encomium of Helen. And for these many reasons we discussed, this is why it's still read and why it's an interesting piece. You have, this kind of reversal of the myth of Helen and this kind of proto-feministic stance that's being taken here. You have a really nicely organized and arranged and structured speech, which gives us insight into how the ancient Greeks looked at composition of speech and how they valued the structure of speech itself. So there's some cultural, artistic, literary value there in its analysis. You also have that meta-rhetorical commentary on the power of speech itself, of how speech is like witchcraft, speech is like, it has a drug-like effect upon us that we still don't really even scientifically understand the mechanisms of. We don't really have a science of persuasion. And then you have that very interesting final line of how perhaps this was all just a diversion for Gorgias. Perhaps this was just a little bit of fun he's having, which then leads us into a great conversation about the sophists and truth and rhetoric and persuasion and Plato. So that's enough for now. There's some Gorgias for you. Hope you enjoyed, and go on and read that yourself. Take some time to read through it and see what you make of it. Have a good day.